Hi there. Welcome to NapTime History channel. Tonight we're stepping off a creaking stagecoach into the dustiest, most unforgiving town you've never wanted to visit. The year is 1875, and you're standing in the middle of Main Street while tumbleweeds roll past like they own the place. Your boots are already filling with sand. There's a suspicious smell coming from the saloon, and that man with the sheriff's badge is eyeing you like you might be trouble. Here's a fun fact. Statistically speaking, you have about a 1 in 3 chance of dying violently in the next year, and that's if the dysentery doesn't get you first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel while you drift off to sleep. All right, let's begin the story. You step down from that stagecoach, and immediately the dust kicks up into your face like the town itself is testing your resolve. The driver tosses your single bag into the dirt without ceremony. Customer service isn't really a thing yet, and you're left standing there, squinting against the afternoon sun. First things first, you need to figure out where you are, because half these frontier towns don't even have proper names yet. Some enterprising soul has nailed a crooked sign to a post that reads perdition, or maybe prediction. The letters are so sun-bleached you can't tell. The main street stretches before you like a gauntlet of possibilities, most of them bad. To your left, there's what passes for a general store, its wooden facade so warped by heat and cold that it looks like it's melting. To your right, the inevitable saloon beckons with tinny piano music and the promise of either information or a knife in the ribs. Straight ahead, you spot what might be a boarding house, though the word house is being generous to that collection of planks and wishful thinking. You take your first deep breath of frontier air and immediately regret it. The cocktail of horse manure, unwashed bodies, and something that died under the boardwalk last Tuesday fills your nostrils. This is your new reality, and nostril adaptation is survival skill number 1 out here. The locals are already sizing you up, and their assessment system is ruthlessly efficient. Are you prey, predator, or irrelevant? Your clothes mark you as an outsider, too clean, too whole, too Eastern. That needs to change fast if you want to blend in. A grizzled prospector shuffles past, his beard so full of debris it could qualify as a mobile ecosystem. He mutters something about claim jumpers and spits tobacco juice dangerously close to your boots. Welcome wagon, frontier style. You need to establish yourself quickly, but carefully. Walk too confidently, and you're either law enforcement or looking for trouble. Walk too meekly, and you're everyone's mark. Historians still argue whether the average frontier town was as violent as Hollywood suggests, but standing here watching 2 men argue over a card game while their hands hover near their guns, you're inclined to believe the worst. The town layout follows a predictable pattern, one main street with businesses facing each other like duelists, alleys running between buildings that you should definitely avoid after dark, and a collection of shacks and tents spreading out from the center like a rash. There's usually a church at one end of town and a cemetery at the other, which tells you everything about the local success rate at redemption. Your immediate priority is shelter, but first you need to understand the local power structure. Who runs this town? Is it the sheriff, the saloon owner, the banker, or that woman in the expensive dress who everyone seems to defer to? Sometimes it's the blacksmith, because when everyone depends on horses, the person who shoes them holds surprising influence. You notice the telegraph office has bars on its windows. Information is power here, and someone's protecting theirs. As you stand there getting your bearings, a drunk stumbles out of the saloon and face plants in the street. Nobody helps him, nobody even looks. That's lesson number 2. Mind your own business unless someone's paying you not to. The drunk's pockets are probably being picked right now by one of those street children who materialized out of nowhere, but that's not your problem. Yet. The saloon doors swing with that distinctive creak you've heard about but never experienced, and you push through into a world of shadows, smoke, and approximately 17 different ways to die. The bartender, a man whose mustache could double as a small hedge, glances up from polishing a glass that will never, ever be clean. His eyes do that quick inventory, gun, money, threat level, before he nods almost imperceptibly. You've passed the initial screening. You belly up to the bar because standing in the doorway marks you as either a coward or a target, sometimes both. The wood is scarred with knife marks, bullet holes, and what might be teeth marks if you look too closely, which you shouldn't. Whiskey, you say, because ordering anything else is like wearing a sign that says, "I'm new here and my pockets are full." And the bartender pours something brown from a bottle with no label, and you try not to think about what percentage of it is actually whiskey versus creative frontier chemistry. The first sip burns like liquid punishment, and you understand immediately why everyone here looks so tough. They're all in constant pain from drinking this stuff. But you don't cough, don't wheeze, don't let your eyes water. That's the test. And around you, several regular patrons return to their conversations, having decided you're not worth robbing. Yet, saloon geography matters more than you'd think. The poker tables by the wall are for serious players with serious money and seriously flexible relationships with honesty. The tables in the middle are for casual drinkers and information trading. The dark corners are for negotiations that involve either romance or murder. Sometimes it's hard to tell which. And that table by the window? That's for the local power broker who likes to see trouble coming down Main Street. You scan the room while pretending to enjoy your paint-thinner whiskey. There's always a hierarchy in these places, as rigid as any European court, but with more spitting. At the top, the professional gamblers in their clean shirts and careful movements. Middle tier, the regular working folks, cowboys between drives, miners on a spree, merchants closing deals. Bottom tier, the drifters, drunks, and desperados who everyone tolerates until they don't. The poker game in the corner erupts into an argument about whether that ace came from the deck or someone's sleeve. This is your crash course in frontier card game survival. Never sit with your back to the door. Always count the cards even if you're not playing. And for the love of whatever deity you favor, don't win too much too fast. The gravedigger's busiest customers are lucky amateurs who didn't know when to fold. A woman in a red dress and practical boots saunters past, and you learn quickly that the soiled doves of the frontier are often the best informed people in town. They hear everything, see everything, and survive by being smarter than everyone assumes. One of them catches your eye and nods toward an empty chair at her table. Information costs money here, but it's usually worth it if you want to survive past Tuesday. The piano player, drunk since probably 1863, pounds out something that might have been a song in a previous life. Nobody's really listening, but the noise provides cover for dozens of quiet conversations about claim locations, cattle prices, and who's planning to rob whom. You catch fragments. Railroad coming through. Sheriff's in Baxter's pocket. Found color up at Willow Creek. Each piece of information is currency if you know how to spend it. Historians still argue whether the average frontier saloon saw as much violence as legend suggests, but the number of bullet holes in this ceiling suggests the legends might be underreporting. You notice the bartender has a sawed-off shotgun within easy reach and mirrors positioned to eliminate blind spots. The piano has metal plating on the side facing the room. These aren't decorative choices. Your whiskey's half gone, and you've learned three important things. The sheriff is corrupt, but predictably so. There's a freight wagon due tomorrow that everyone seems interested in, and the man in the corner with the pearl-handled revolvers hasn't touched his drink once. That last detail matters because Stone's sober gunfighters in saloons are like lit fuses. You don't know when they'll go off, but they will. A fight breaks out near the faro table. Someone accused the dealer of running a rigged game, which of course he is, but saying it out loud breaks the social contract. The bouncer, a man built like a grain silo with fists, handles it with practiced efficiency. 2 punches, 1 throw, and the accusers sailing through the doors into the street. The game resumes before the doors stop swinging. This is frontier justice, swift, brutal, and entertaining for everyone not directly involved. You've nursed your drink long enough to establish presence without seeming cheap. Time to make a choice. Join a poker game and risk your meager funds. Strike up a conversation with someone who might hire or help you, or retreat with your intelligence gathered and your hide intact. The saloon's a resource, but it's also a trap, and knowing when to leave is just as important as knowing how to enter. As you contemplate your options, someone sits down next to you. He's got that look of a man who knows things, the kind of things that keep you alive or get you dead, depending on how you use them. New in town, he says. It's not a question. Word of advice, friend. That freight wagon everyone's whispering about, stay clear of it. He drops a silver dollar on the bar and walks away before you can respond. In the Wild West, free advice is never free, but figuring out the cost often comes too late. You emerge from the saloon with your intelligence gathered and liver slightly poisoned, ready to tackle the next survival essential, equipping yourself for this dust bowl of dreams and danger. The general store beckons like a frontier Amazon warehouse, except Jeff Bezos is a gruff Swedish immigrant named Sven who trusts nobody and accepts IOUs from even fewer. The bell above the door sounds like it's dying, which is appropriate because half the merchandise looks like it already has. Sven looks up from his ledger, pencil poised like a tiny weapon, and his eyes narrow as he catalogs everything about you, from your two clean boots to your optimistic expression. Cash only, he grunts before you've even said hello. Customer service, Frontier Edition. The store is a chaotic museum of necessities and nonsense. Bolts of calico fabric lean against barrels of pickles that have achieved sentience. Mining equipment mingles with ladies' corsets in a display that suggests Sven's organizational system is based entirely on wherever things landed when thrown. The smell is indescribable: leather, gun oil, cheese that's given up, and something sweet that might be candy or might be rat poison. Sometimes they're stored in adjacent jars. Your mental shopping list is a balance between immediate survival and not looking like a rube with money. First priority, a gun, because out here, being unarmed is like being naked, but more fatal. Sven wordlessly gestures toward a display case containing revolvers that range from might work to definitely haunted. The Colt 45 Peacemaker is the iPhone of its day, reliable, popular, and everyone knows how to use it. But at $26, it costs more than most folks make in a month. Got anything more economical, you ask? And Sven produces a Navy Colt that looks like it's seen action in several wars and possibly a few bar mitzvahs. $15, and he throws in a holster that might have been leather once, but now has the consistency of beef jerky. The gun's not pretty, but pretty doesn't stop bullets. You test the action, check the cylinder, and pretend you know what you're looking for, while Sven watches with the expression of a man who's seen too many greenhorns shoot their own feet off. Next up, clothing that says, "I belong here," instead of, "I have money, please rob me." Your Eastern duds need to go, replaced by canvas pants that could stand up on their own, a shirt that's more patch than original fabric, and a hat that provides actual sun protection instead of whatever that felt thing on your head is pretending to do. Sven throws in a bandana for free, which in frontier retail means it's either worthless or cursed. Ammunition is sold like candy. If candy could kill you from 100 yards away, you buy enough to defend yourself, but not enough to suggest you're planning something. It's a delicate balance. Too little and you're unprepared. Too much and people start asking questions about your intentions. 50 rounds seems right, even though Sven's expression suggests most folks don't live long enough to fire that many. The food section is where reality hits hard. Your choices are hardtack, now with 30% less weevils. Salt pork that could double as a weapon, beans that require more soaking than the annual rainfall provides, and canned goods whose labels have faded into illegibility. Culinary Russian roulette, frontier style. You stock up on coffee because it's the only thing between you and complete despair, plus some sugar that's only slightly crawling with ants. Need a bedroll? Sven asks, producing something that might have been white in a previous century. $20 later, you own a sleeping arrangement that's one step above the bare ground, but 2 steps below comfortable. It comes with bonus wildlife. Fleas are free, but you suspect bed bugs cost extra. The frontier, where luxury is a concept and comfort is a myth. Medical supplies are crucial because the local doctor, if there is one, learned surgery from the Civil War school of hack it off and hope. Laudanum for pain, whiskey for everything else, and bandages that are definitely not from the clean pile. You grab some carbolic acid because infection kills more folks out here than bullets, though bullets are certainly trying their best. Historians still argue whether frontier medicine killed more people than it saved, but standing here looking at Sven's pharmaceutical section, you're betting on killed. A knife is essential, not for fighting, though it might come to that, but for everything from cutting rope to convincing people you're not worth messing with. Sven produces a Bowie knife that could fell a small tree or a large man, depending on your needs. The weight feels good in your hand, substantial enough to matter, but not so heavy you'll leave it behind when it counts. Water is life in the desert, so a good canteen is worth its weight in whatever's actually in those unlabeled cans. You choose one that doesn't leak too badly and doesn't taste like its previous owner died with it. $2 seems steep for a metal container, but dying of thirst is free and permanent, so you pay up. Your pile of essentials grows. Matches that might light if you're lucky. Soap that's more lye than anything gentle. A rain slicker for the 2 days a year it rains. And a compass that points vaguely northish. Each item is a small bet on your survival, and the house always wins eventually. Sven tallies it up with the enthusiasm of an undertaker measuring for coffins. $73.40, he announces, which is approximately all your money plus your dignity. You negotiate badly and manage to knock off the 40 cents. Sven throws in a piece of rock candy that's achieved geological status, calling it customer appreciation set. You appreciate not arguing further. As you gather your survival starter pack, a grizzled old-timer who's been lurking by the potbelly stove offers unsolicited advice. That compass don't work at worth spit near iron deposits, which is everywhere worth going. Navigate by the stars, boy, or by the smell of water if you're lucky enough to find any. He spits tobacco juice into a can with practiced accuracy. Oh, and that laudanum, don't get too fond of it. Seen more men lost to the poppy than to Apache raids. You step out of Sven's emporium, significantly poorer, but theoretically better equipped for survival. Your Eastern clothes are bundled and under your arm like the corpse of your former optimistic self. The gun sits heavy on your hip, a constant reminder that violence here isn't a possibility, but a probability. As you adjust your new hat against the brutal sun, you realize you've just spent 3 months' wages on the basic requirement of not dying immediately. Welcome to frontier economics, where everything costs too much and life is still cheap. The sun hammers down like it's got a personal grudge against you as you contemplate your next move. Finding work that pays in money rather than bullets or broken promises. Your $73 worth of survival gear won't mean much when your stomach starts eating itself. And out here, charity is about as common as an honest politician. You notice a handwritten board nailed to the saloon's exterior wall, the frontier version of LinkedIn, except the networking involves more firearms. The postings are eclectic, Needed, man who can read, ask at bank. Cowboys wanted for drive to Abilene, survivors paid well. Someone to dig new privy, previous digger missing. That last one raises questions you don't want answered. The most promising option seems to be the telegraph office, where literacy is actually an asset rather than a suspicious Eastern affectation. You push through the door to find a thin man in spectacles frantically tapping at a key like he's performing an exorcism on the machine. He glances up, notes your relatively clean hands and ability to walk upright, and looks interested. You read and write? He asks without preamble. When you nod, he practically weeps with relief. Thank Mary and all her cousins. My assistant ran off with a cattle drive last week, claimed the cows were better conversationalists than me. He gestures at the towering stack of messages awaiting transmission. $1.50 a day if you can work the key. $2 if you can do it without driving me to drink more than I already do. Telegraph work sounds cushy compared to the alternatives, but you quickly learn it's got its own hazards. Every message that comes through is someone's secret, and in a town where information is ammunition, you're basically sitting on an arsenal. Within your first hour, you've learned about 3 affairs, 2 planned robberies, and a shipment of gold that definitely doesn't exist. Wink, wink. Your new boss, Theodore, treats the telegraph like a sacred oracle that occasionally deigns to speak through mystic clicks. He's been out here 6 years, which in telegraph operator terms makes him ancient. First rule, he says, adjusting his spectacles. You don't read the messages. You're a conduit, not a consciousness. Second rule, you definitely don't remember the messages you didn't read. Third rule, if men with guns ask about messages, you developed sudden amnesia. Selective memory loss has saved more lives than all the doctors in Texas. The telegraph office becomes your crash course in frontier economics. Every message tells a story of desperation, opportunity, or impending doom. Cattle prices fluctuating wildly based on railroad delays. Mining claims being bought and sold by people who've never held a pickaxe. Family members inquiring about relatives who stopped writing months ago. Those messages carry a particular weight of unspoken tragedy. But other opportunities keep presenting themselves, because in a boomtown, everyone needs everything done yesterday. The livery stable needs someone who can muck stalls without fainting from the aroma. The newspaper, a generous term for 2 pages of gossip, advertisements, and creative spelling, needs someone to set type. The undertaker cheerfully mentions he's looking for an assistant, though his last 3 quit due to philosophical differences about talking to the clients. You supplement your telegraph income with whatever odd jobs won't kill you immediately. Loading freight wagons pays well because the risk of being robbed is proportionally high. The key is looking poor enough that bandits figure you're not worth the bullets, while actually being armed enough to make them reconsider their career choices. It's a delicate balance that requires the right amount of trail dust and visible weaponry. The ranch foreman who comes to town every few weeks represents another option. Cowboys make $30 a month plus found, which means food and a place to sleep that's only slightly worse than the ground. But the work will either kill you or turn you into leather, and that's before considering stampedes, rivers, and the personality disorders that develop from spending months with the same 15 men and 5,000 cattle. Can you ride? The foreman asks, sizing you up like beef on the hoof. You can, technically, if staying on a horse while it walks counts as riding. Can you rope? You cannot. Can you shoot? Your recent gun purchase suggests yes, though actual accuracy remains theoretical. Can you stay awake for 3 days straight while everything tries to kill you? That seems pessimistic, but probably accurate. He offers you work at a nearby ranch, not the big cattle drives, but general labor, mending fences, branding, and other tasks that sound deceptively simple until you're doing them in 100-degree heat while things with fangs lurk in every shadow. The pay is steady, the food is included, and the chance of dying is only moderate. In frontier terms, that's practically a government job. The most unusual offer comes from a woman everyone calls Widow Chen, though historians still argue whether she was actually widowed or just found the title convenient. She runs a laundry service that's really a front for an information network that would make modern intelligence agencies weep with envy. I need someone who can deliver parcels and remember exactly nothing about where they went, she says, her smile suggesting that forgetting might be aided by blunt force trauma if necessary. The economics of frontier survival become clear. Honest work pays just enough to keep you alive, while dishonest work pays enough to get you killed. The sweet spot is work that's legally gray, but morally justifiable, like Theodore's selective amnesia about telegram contents, or Widow Chen's mysterious parcels that definitely contain only soap and definitely not opium or stolen gold certificates. You stick with the telegraph job because indoor work without cattle seems like winning the frontier lottery. Theodore teaches you the finer points of Morse code, which is like learning a new language where every word is just dots and dashes, and the grammar was invented by someone having a seizure. Soon you're tapping out messages about mining yields and missing persons with the best of them, pretending not to notice when certain names appear repeatedly in contexts that suggest they won't be needing telegrams much longer. The real education comes from the messages themselves. You learn the rhythms of frontier life through the desperate taps of the key. Send money, stop cattle died, stop. Or Martha took ill, stop, send doctor, stop. Or the ominous, if you don't hear from me by Thursday, stop, assume the worst, stop. Each message is someone's lifeline, their last hope, or their first mistake. As the day ends and Theodore counts out your $1.50 in coins that have seen better decades, he offers one last piece of wisdom. Out here, son, the best job is the one that keeps you vertical and breathing. Everything else is just details. You pocket your wages, feeling richer than your bank account suggests. You've got work, you've got shelter, and you've got enough ammunition to make people think twice. In frontier mathematics, that equals success, at least for today. You're 3 weeks into your telegraph operator career when the door slams open hard enough to rattle the entire building, and in walks Trouble wearing spurs and a week's worth of trail dust. 3 men, armed like they're expecting the entire Union Army to resurrect and attack, spread out in that practiced way that makes your hand drift toward your Navy Colt. Theodore, veteran of too many similar entrances, slowly raises his hands while giving you a look that screams, selective amnesia, remember? The leader, a man whose face looks like it was carved from old leather by someone who gave up halfway through, steps forward. We're looking for information about a certain message that might have come through here. His hand rests on his pistol with the casual familiarity of someone who's drawn it for worse reasons than information gathering. This is your introduction to the delicate dance of frontier outlaws, where everyone pretends to be legitimate businessmen while openly carrying enough firepower to siege a small fort. These particular businessmen are interested in a message about a gold shipment that you definitely didn't read and absolutely don't remember every word of, including the part about it passing through Devil's Canyon next Tuesday at dawn. Haven't seen anything like that. Theodore lies with the smooth confidence of someone who's been practicing this exact scenario. We just handle regular correspondence, mining reports, family news, that sort of thing. He gestures at the logbook, which he's cleverly kept filled with the most boring entries possible for exactly this situation. The outlaws aren't buying it, but they're also not shooting, which in frontier negotiation terms means things are going well. You recognize the dynamics at play here. They need the information, but killing the only telegraph operators in town would be like burning down the library. Inconvenient for everyone, including them. Maybe your memory needs some encouragement, the second outlaw suggests, producing a knife that's seen enough use to have developed a personality. He's the enforcer type, all scars and poor life choices, the kind who thinks violence is a conversation starter rather than a last resort. You've learned that frontier outlaws fall into distinct categories. There are the professionals like these three, who treat crime like a business with unfortunate violent overhead. There are the desperate ones, driven to crime by circumstances or poor planning, usually dead within 6 months. And there are the true psychopaths, who use the lawlessness as an excuse to indulge appetites that would have gotten them hanged even in civilization. Gentlemen, you say, surprising everyone, including yourself, by speaking up. Even if we had seen such a message, which we haven't, sharing that information would shut down this office permanently. The telegraph company would send investigators, the army would get involved, and suddenly this town's cut off from the outside world. Bad for business all around. It's a calculated risk, appealing to their practical side. Historians still argue whether most frontier outlaws were intelligent criminals adapting to circumstances or just thugs who got lucky occasionally. These three seem to fall into the former category, exchanging glances that suggest they're doing the math on long-term versus short-term gains. The leader narrows his eyes, studying you like you're a poker hand he's trying to read. Smart boy, maybe too smart. But he steps back, some unspoken decision reached. We'll be around town for a few days. If your memory improves, there might be some profit in it for everyone. And the threat is implied but unmistakable. Cooperate or face the alternative, which probably involves shallow graves and coyote food. They leave as dramatically as they arrived, and Theodore immediately pours himself a whiskey with shaking hands. That, he says, is why I drink. Well, one of 17 reasons, but it's definitely top 5. He offers you the bottle, and you take a swig because near death experiences apparently require medicinal alcohol. This encounter becomes your template for surviving outlaw interactions. First, never show fear. They can smell it, like wolves smell wounded deer. Second, always provide a practical reason why keeping you alive benefits them more than the alternative. Third, never, ever look them directly in the eye unless you're prepared to back it up with lead. Over the following days, you observe these outlaws around town, learning their patterns. They drink at the saloon, but never to excess. They pay for everything in gold coins that are suspiciously fresh from the mint. They ask casual questions about train schedules and guard routines that aren't casual at all. Everyone knows they're planning something, but frontier etiquette demands we all pretend otherwise until the shooting starts. The tension in town ratchets up like a clock spring being wound too tight. The sheriff, who's about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a gunfight, makes himself scarce. The banker hires extra guards who look like they'd run at the first gunshot. Even Widow Chen's usually unflappable demeanor shows cracks, and she's survived 2 husbands and a range war. You learn that outlaw gangs operate like dysfunctional businesses with bullets. There's always a leader who's either charismatic or terrifying enough to keep the others in line. There's the loyal lieutenant who'd follow the boss into hell and probably will. There's the wild card who everyone tolerates because he's useful until he inevitably isn't. And there's usually one member who's starting to think maybe farming wasn't such a bad career choice after all. The smart money says to leave town before whatever's planning to happen happens. But the telegraph office is your lifeline, and Theodore can't run it alone. Plus, your growing knowledge of who's planning what has become valuable enough that several parties are willing to pay for selective information leaks. You're playing all sides, which in frontier terms is either brilliant or suicidal, often both. One evening, the lead outlaw returns alone. He's different without his crew, older, tireder, more human. That message about Tuesday, he says quietly. Might be some folks would pay well to know if the details change. Might be those folks would remember who helped them when they're dividing up proceeds. He slides a $20 gold piece across the counter. For your continued discretion and possible memory improvements. This is how you learn the real economy of the frontier, not the official one of cattle and crops, but the shadow economy of information and selective blindness. Every business in town has similar arrangements. The saloon owner who waters down drinks less for certain customers. The stable hand who doesn't ask why some horses arrive at night and leave before dawn. The doctor who treats gunshot wounds without curiosity about their origin. You pocket the gold piece, understanding you've just crossed a line from observer to participant. In the Wild West, neutrality is a luxury nobody can afford. You're either predator or prey, and sometimes you have to show teeth just to avoid becoming dinner. Theodore pretends not to notice the transaction, busy with sudden urgent maintenance on the telegraph key. As the outlaws prepare for whatever violence they're planning, you prepare for the aftermath. Extra ammunition, cached in various hiding spots, an escape route planned through the back window, a bag packed with essentials in case running becomes the better part of valor. Because when outlaws and law collide in a frontier town, the smartest place to be is elsewhere, counting your gold and breathing through all the holes God gave you. The desert doesn't care about your feelings, your plans, or your pitiful human need for water. You learned this the hard way when Theodore sent you to deliver a message to a mining camp just a day's ride north, which in frontier measurements means anywhere between 6 hours and death. Now you're standing at the edge of town, staring at a landscape that looks like God's own frying pan, preparing for a journey that might end with you becoming a sun-bleached cautionary tale. Your horse, a creature whose enthusiasm for life ranks somewhere between a funeral dirge and a tax collector, stands ready with all the eagerness of someone heading to their own execution. You've loaded your saddlebags with what passes for desert survival gear, 2 canteens that leak only slightly, hardtack that could break teeth or windows depending on your needs, and a chunk of salt pork that's achieved an immortality through preservation. The old-timer at the stable, missing enough teeth to make his advice whistle, offers unsolicited wisdom. Desert'll kill you 3 ways before breakfast: heat stroke, dehydration, or something with fangs. Sometimes all 3 if it's feeling creative. He spits tobacco juice with remarkable accuracy. Stay to the ridgelines when you can. Valleys are ovens, and arrows fly better downhill if you catch my meaning. You set out as dawn breaks, because traveling in the full heat of day is like volunteering for your own cremation. The temperature is already climbing from unpleasant toward hostile to human life, and it's not even 7 o'clock. Your shadow stretches long and thin across the sand, like it's trying to escape back to town without you. The first rule of desert survival: water is everything, and everything wants your water. Your horse knows this, which is why it's already trying to drink from your canteen every time you stop. You ration carefully, a sip every hour, just enough to keep your throat from turning into leather. The temptation to gulp grows with each mile, but discipline is what separates the living from the cautionary tales. Navigation in the desert is part science, part art, and mostly prayer. That compass you bought from Sven spins lazily, confused by iron deposits or possibly just broken. You navigate by landmarks instead, that mesa that looks like a sleeping giant, the stand of cottonwoods that marks a seasonal stream, the pile of rocks that might be a trail marker or might be where someone gave up and died. Cheerful thoughts for a cheerful landscape. By noon, the heat has become a living thing, pressing down on you like a physical weight. Your shirt is soaked with sweat that evaporates instantly, leaving salt crystals like your body's trying to season itself. The horse plods on with the determination of the deeply pessimistic, occasionally snorting its displeasure at existence in general, and this trip in particular. You find shade under a rock overhang that's approximately 2 degrees cooler than the surrounding hellscape. This is when you learn about the desert's other residents. A rattlesnake, coiled in the shade you'd chosen, expresses its displeasure at your arrival with a sound like bones shaking in a leather bag. You back away slowly, because quick movements in the desert usually end with regret and puncture wounds. The scorpion you discover in your boot during a rest stop teaches you to shake out everything before wearing it. The desert is basically Australia's mean older brother, where everything either wants to kill you or is indifferent to your death, which amounts to the same thing. You develop a healthy paranoia about where you put your hands, feet, and various other parts you'd prefer to keep unpunctured. Water sources in the desert are like frontier politicians, rare, unreliable, and often toxic. You find a seep marked on your rough map, only to discover it's been claimed by enough alkali to poison a battalion. The bones of various animals scattered around it suggest others made the discovery too late. Your horse, smarter than it looks, refuses to drink despite its obvious thirst. Historians still argue whether more people died from bad water or no water in the desert. Standing there with your tongue feeling like sandpaper and your canteens down to their last precious inches, you vote for both simultaneously. You push on, because stopping means joining the bone collection. The mining camp finally appears like a mirage that decided to be helpful for once. It's a collection of tents and shanties clinging to a hillside like architectural lichen, surrounded by holes that either produced fortune or swallowed it. The miners who greet you look like they've been sun-dried and rehydrated repeatedly, leather-skinned men with eyes that have seen the bottom of too many empty holes. "Telegraph man?" one asks, and you nod, not trusting your voice until you've had water that doesn't taste like it's been filtered through a prospector's sock. They point you toward the camp boss, but first, water. The barrel of questionable liquid they call drinking water tastes like paradise compared to the warm canteen dregs you've been nursing. The return journey benefits from hard-won wisdom. You leave at 3 a.m., navigating by stars that shine with the brightness of cosmic mockery. Every shadow could hide death in scales or fangs, so you develop a shuffling walk that announces your presence to anything that might take offense at surprise visitors. Your boot-shaking ritual becomes religious in its devotion. Dawn finds you halfway back, the town visible as a dark smudge against the horizon. You've survived the desert, which in frontier terms makes you either lucky or too stupid to die. Your lips are cracked, your skin feels like leather in training, and you're pretty sure you've sweated out your soul somewhere around mile 15. But you're vertical and breathing, which beats the alternative. The desert teaches hard lessons, that civilization is a thin veneer over a world that defaults to hostile, that water is worth more than gold when you don't have any, and that everything in nature has evolved specifically to ruin your day. You've gained a healthy respect for anyone who voluntarily ventures into that sandy hell, and an even healthier determination to charge extra for future desert deliveries. Back in town, Theodore takes one look at your sun-scorched face and salt-crusted clothes and pours you a whiskey. "Dessert tried to kill you, huh?" he observes with the casual wisdom of someone who's sent dozens of men on similar journeys. It'll do that. But you're back, which means you're either tougher or luckier than you look. Either way, you've earned a raise, $1.75 a day, and you can sleep in the office on particularly hot nights. You accept gratefully, already planning never to leave town again unless at gunpoint or significantly better wages. The desert waits out there, patient as death and twice as certain, ready to test the next fool who thinks mankind belongs anywhere but huddled in our fragile towns. You've passed its test once. Push your luck too often, and you'll end up as another cautionary skeleton, teaching future travelers where not to look for water. The Native American delegation rides into town on a Tuesday morning, and suddenly everyone remembers urgent business that needs attending to indoors. 5 men on painted ponies, moving with the kind of quiet confidence that makes your hand unconsciously check your pistol. They're not here to raid. Raiders don't announce themselves by riding down Main Street in broad daylight. They're here to trade, which in frontier terms is somehow more complicated than warfare. Theodore glances up from his telegraph key, adjusts his spectacles, and mutters something about interesting times in the way that suggests interesting is a euphemism for potentially fatal. The leader of the delegation, a man whose bearing suggests he's seen enough broken treaties to paper a house, dismounts outside the general store. The locals pretend not to stare while absolutely staring. You've heard all the stories, of course. Bloodthirsty savages who'd scalp you for looking at them wrong. Noble warriors defending their ancestral lands. The truth, as you're learning, sits somewhere in the messy middle where everyone's trying to survive and nobody's hands are entirely clean. These particular representatives are from the local band. Historians still argue whether they were Apache, Comanche, or one of the smaller tribes whose names got lost when their languages did. Sven emerges from his store looking like he'd rather face a cavalry charge than conduct this particular transaction. But business is business, even when it requires sign language, broken English, and the kind of careful diplomacy usually reserved for handling dynamite. The native leader produces a bundle of furs that makes Sven's eyes light up despite himself, beaver pelts that would fetch premium prices back east, if they can make it that far without being stolen, lost, or ruined. The negotiation is fascinating if you understand that every gesture carries weight. The native traders know exactly what their goods are worth, having dealt with frontier merchants long enough to recognize creative mathematics when they see it. Sven knows they know, and they know he knows they know, creating a circular logic that would make philosophers weep. They settle on terms that leave everyone equally dissatisfied, which in frontier commerce means it's a fair deal. You're watching this unfold when one of the younger native men approaches the telegraph office. He's maybe your age, wearing a mix of traditional dress and traded goods that tells its own story of cultural collision. "Talking wire," he says in careful English, gesturing at the telegraph pole. "We hear it sing. What does it say?" This is your introduction to the complicated dynamics of frontier communication. The telegraph lines crossing native lands are seen as everything from mystical curiosity to invasion of copper-wrapped lies. You try explaining electromagnetic pulses and Morse code, but honestly, singing wires carrying words sounds insane even to you. He listens with the patient expression of someone humoring a child's fantasy. The real education comes from what he tells you in return. The movements of army patrols, reported with casual accuracy that makes you realize the hostile savages have an intelligence network that would embarrass most military operations. The location of water sources that don't appear on any map, jealously guarded knowledge that he shares with careful deliberation, the names of traders who can be trusted, a very short list, and those who water their whiskey and short their scales. Your people think land can be owned, he observes, watching Sven trying to cheat his companions with the dedication of a true artist. Like owning wind or rain, we think different. This makes for, he pauses, searching for words, complicated arrangements. And the complications become clear when a group of town drunks decide this is the perfect moment to express their opinions about Indians in our town. They swagger over with the confidence of men who've forgotten that liquid courage evaporates real quick when faced with people who've been fighting since childhood. The lead drunk, whose tactical assessment skills are inversely proportional to his whiskey consumption, makes threatening gestures that would be more impressive if he could stand straight. What happens next is a lesson in efficient violence. The young native man doesn't even stand up. One moment the drunk is reaching for his gun, the next he's on the ground examining the stars that have mysteriously appeared in daylight. His friends suddenly remember appointments elsewhere. The native man returns to our conversation like nothing happened, while you try to look equally nonchalant despite your racing pulse. The sheriff, displaying his usual commitment to law enforcement, arrives just late enough to avoid any actual sheriffing. He surveys the scene, unconscious drunk, calm native traders, nervous townspeople, and makes the executive decision that nothing happened worth investigating. Man must have tripped, he declares to no one's belief. These boardwalks are dangerous when you're drunk. As the trading concludes, the native leader approaches Theodore directly. Through a combination of languages and gestures, he conveys something about messages, army movements, and mutual benefit. Theodore, proving he's survived 6 years on the frontier by being smarter than he looks, negotiates an arrangement where certain information flows both ways. It's treasonous, profitable, and probably the only reason the town hasn't been raided yet. We're not taking sides. Theodore explains to you later, after the delegation has vanished into the desert like smoke. We're just facilitating communication between parties who might otherwise communicate with bullets. It's practically humanitarian work if you squint right and don't think too hard about the legal implications. You learn to recognize the signs of native presence even when they're invisible. The telegraph lines that get cut in specific patterns that might be accidents or might be messages. The trading posts that mysteriously know to stock certain goods before anyone's asked for them. The way certain valleys become very unhealthy for travelers who haven't paid their respects to the local bands. Historians still argue whether frontier towns succeeded despite native resistance or because of carefully negotiated coexistence that nobody wanted to admit to. Living through it, you understand it's mostly about survival, everyone's. The natives adapting to a world where their traditional lands are being carved up by invisible lines on papers they never signed. The settlers trying to build something permanent in places that were never meant for permanent. and caught in the middle. People like you, trying to navigate relationships that shift like sand dunes. A week later, an army patrol rides through asking about hostile activity. Theodore develops sudden amnesia about any native traders visiting town. You certainly didn't see anything. Sven's new collection of premium furs? He's had those for months, definitely didn't just acquire them. The town's collective memory becomes Swiss cheese when it comes to certain topics. The young native man returns once more, alone this time, to leave a message for the talking wire. It's addressed to another band 300 miles away, warning about troop movements and bad water at certain springs. You send it without question, understanding that you're part of a network that exists in the spaces between official history. When he pays in gold coins that definitely didn't come from any recent army payroll robbery, you provide a receipt for telegraph services rendered that's vague enough to mean anything. As he prepares to leave, he pauses. "You're singing wires," he says with something that might be a smile. "They say the iron horse is coming. When it comes, everything changes. Good for some, for others." He shrugs, a gesture that contains centuries of similar changes, none of them particularly beneficial for his people. Then he's gone, leaving you to contemplate a future where the frontier's already complex dynamics get a lot more complicated. The scream that pierces the afternoon quiet is the kind that makes everyone in town simultaneously reach for their guns and their whiskey, though not necessarily in that order. You rush out of the telegraph office to find Bart, the prospector, clutching what's left of his left hand, which appears to have had a serious disagreement with a rattlesnake about personal space. Blood drips through his fingers while he performs an impromptu dance that would be entertaining if it weren't so potentially fatal. "Doc Holliday!" someone shouts, which is unfortunate because Doc Holliday is currently 3 sheets to the wind at the saloon, self-medicating for what he calls the human condition. The town's medical establishment consists of him, a dentist who pulls teeth with pliers and enthusiasm, and Widow Chen, who knows things about herbs that she won't explain but definitely work. Since Doc is temporarily unavailable for anything requiring steady hands, you're about to get a crash course in frontier medicine. Theodore, displaying the kind of practical knowledge that comes from years of survival, takes charge. Get him to Doc's office, someone sober him up, throw a bucket of water on him if you have to. He points at you. Run to Widow Chen's, tell her rattlesnake bite. Left hand, about 5 minutes ago, she'll know what to bring. Widow Chen's establishment smells like a battlefield between lavender and something that might be medicinal or might be last week's laundry. She takes one look at your panicked expression and starts gathering bottles with the efficiency of someone who's dealt with too many emergencies. "Rattlesnake?" she asks, already knowing the answer. This town is built on their ancestral breeding ground, but does anyone listen when I suggest relocating? No, they do not. And she produces a collection of tinctures, powders, and implements that look like they belong in either a medical bag or a torture chamber. The distinction in frontier medicine is largely academic. She also hands you a bottle of something clear. "For the patient," she says, then hands you another identical bottle. for whoever has to hold him down. By the time you return, Doc Holliday has been partially resurrected through the judicious application of cold water and hot coffee. He sways slightly, but his hands are steadier than they have any right to be. Bart lies on the examination table, which is just a door balanced on sawhorses, but serves its purpose. His hand has swollen to roughly twice its normal size and turned a color that doesn't appear in nature except as a warning. "Well," Doc says, examining the wound with professional interest and personal distaste. "The good news is you're probably not going to die. The bad news is you're going to wish you had for the next few hours." And he accepts Widow Chen's supplies with a nod of respect between fellow practitioners of the healing arts, such as they are. What follows is an education in frontier medical procedures, where the cure is often worse than the disease, but marginally better than death. Doc makes 2 deep cuts across the fang marks, encouraging them to bleed freely. The theory, he explains while working, is to let the poison out with the blood. The practice involves Bart screaming creatively while 3 men hold him down. Widow Chen produces a poultice that smells like death's own garden, but apparently draws out poison, or infection, or evil spirits. Nobody's entirely sure, but empirical evidence suggests it works more often than it doesn't. She applies it with the casual confidence of someone who's seen enough snake bites to consider them routine annoyances rather than emergencies. The real danger, Doc explains, wrapping Bart's hand in relatively clean bandages, is infection. Out here, more people die from infected hangnails than gunshots. Well, that's hyperbole, but you understand the point. He produces a bottle of carbolic acid that makes everyone's eyes water. This'll prevent infection, assuming it doesn't dissolve the flesh first. Historians still argue whether frontier medicine saved more lives than it ended. But watching Doc work, you understand it's not about perfect treatment. It's about good enough to keep you alive until your body figures out the rest. Good enough to get you back to work, because nobody can afford to be sick for long. Good enough to prevent the kind of infections that turn minor injuries into major funerals. The next few hours are touch and go. Bart develops a fever that has him conversing with people who aren't there, including his dead partner and what might be God or might be the mine supervisor. It's hard to tell through the delirium. Doc forces various liquids down his throat: water, whiskey, something green that Widow Chen swears by. The combination would kill a healthy man, but apparently it confuses the poison enough to give Bart's body a fighting chance. You take your turn on watch duty because frontier medicine is a community effort. The patient needs constant monitoring, cold compresses for the fever, and someone to stop them from clawing at the bandages when the healing itch starts. You learn to read the signs, the way fever sweat smells different from regular sweat, the rhythm of breathing that says crisis versus recovery, the color changes that indicate improvement or impending doom. By morning, Bart's fever breaks, and he returns to consciousness with all the enthusiasm of someone who's been run over by their own minecart. His hand looks like it's been through a war, but it's still attached and showing signs of normal color returning. Doc pronounces him likely to survive, Unfortunately for everyone who has to listen to him tell this story for the next 20 years. The bill for this medical miracle is itemized with frontier honesty, saving your worthless life, $20, whiskey, medicinal, $5, whiskey, doctor's fee, $5, Widow Chen's mysterious herbs, $10, not letting you die just to see what happens, priceless, but let's call it $10. Bart pays without complaint, understanding that living is expensive, but dying is permanent. This becomes your template for frontier medical emergencies. When Jake the cowboy gets kicked by a horse and develops a hoof-shaped dent in his ribs, it's whiskey for pain, tight wrapping to hold everything in place, and prayers to whatever deity handles insurance claims. When the banker's wife develops a fever that won't break, it's Widow Chen's herbs, cold baths, and more of those mysterious green liquids that nobody asks about too closely. You develop your own frontier first aid kit, whiskey for antiseptic and anesthetic, clean cloths that you boil religiously because you've seen what infection does, carbolic acid for wounds that need serious disinfection, and a selection of Widow Chen's preparations for everything from rattlesnake bites to broken hearts. The leather pouch becomes your insurance policy against the frontier's constant attempts to kill you in creative ways. The most important medical skill you learn isn't about treatment, it's about prevention. Check your boots for scorpions. Look before you reach into anything. Boil water that looks suspicious, which is all water. Don't get into gunfights unless absolutely necessary. Avoid anyone coughing, because consumption spreads through towns like wildfire through drought-dry grass. And always, always pay Widow Chen on time, because having the local herb woman annoyed with you is hazardous to your health. Doc Holliday, in one of his more sober moments, shares his medical philosophy. The human body wants to live. Most of the time, we're just trying not to interfere with that process too much. Clean the wound, stop the bleeding, prevent infection, and let nature take its course. Everything else is just theater to make the patient feel like we're earning our fee. As Bart recovers enough to start embellishing his story, the snake grows larger with each telling. You reflect on the strange intimacy of frontier medicine. In civilization, doctors maintain professional distance. Out here, saving someone's life is a group effort involving whoever's available, sober enough, and willing to hold down a screaming patient. It creates bonds forged in blood, fever sweat, and the shared relief when someone doesn't die on your watch. The mining camp called Golgotha Springs sits about 15 miles north of town. Though sits implies a level of permanence that's wildly optimistic, it's more like it's temporarily clinging to the hillside, while everyone frantically digs holes, hoping to find fortune before the mountain decides to reclaim its property. You arrive on supply wagon duty, joining the weekly pilgrimage of goods, gossip, and gullible newcomers heading to what locals call the best place to lose everything you never had. The first thing that hits you is the noise, a cacophony of pickaxes, dynamite, cursing in 12 languages, and the occasional scream that could mean either "I'm rich" or "cave in." The second thing is the smell, a perfume of sulfur, sweat, and shattered dreams that hangs in the air like frontier cologne. The third thing is the realization that every single person here has the same fever bright look of treasure madness in their eyes. Your wagon carries the essentials of mining life: pickaxes that will break, dynamite that might work, food that won't kill you immediately, and whiskey that makes you forget why you're eating it. The miners swarm the wagon like locusts with purchasing power, desperate for supplies and news from the outside world, which to them means anywhere that isn't a hole in the ground. "You boys hear about the Collins strike?" asks a miner whose beard contains enough debris to start his own claim. When you shake your head, he launches into the tale with the enthusiasm of someone who's been underground too long. Pulled out a nugget big as a baby's head, course. Then his partner shot him, and his partner's partner shot him, and so on. By the time the dust settled, the nugget was gone, and there were 6 new residents in the cemetery. And this is your introduction to mining economics, where the real gold is in selling supplies to miners. The real silver is in not getting killed for your claim. And the real treasure is maintaining enough sanity to know when to quit. The camp operates on a complex system of claims, counterclaims, and the kind of legal arguments that are settled with shovels rather than lawyers. The camp boss, a German named Schultz, who looks like he was carved from the same granite everyone's digging through, maintains order through a combination of fair dealing and the kind of violence that makes fair dealing seem like the better option. He inspects your wagon's manifest with the attention of someone who knows creative accounting when he sees it. 20 pounds of beans, but only 15 on the scale. Yeah? The other 5 pounds. They evaporated in the desert heat, perhaps. You learn quickly that mining camp inflation makes regular frontier prices look reasonable. A dozen eggs costs more than a night with the fanciest escort in San Francisco. A new pickaxe runs the equivalent of a month's wages. Water, clean water, is worth its weight in gold dust, which is convenient since that's often how it's paid for. The economics only make sense if you're pulling precious metals out of the ground, which most aren't. The actual mining operations range from scientific to suicidal, often both. You watch men lower themselves into holes barely wider than their shoulders, trusting in rotting rope and the goodwill of partners who might be calculating how much more their share would be as sole survivors. The sounds echoing up from the depths, metal on stone, occasional collapses, prayers in various languages, create a symphony of desperation. "Mining's simple," explains a grizzled veteran, missing fingers on both hands. "You dig until you find something or die trying, sometimes both on the same day." He shows you his claim, a hole that goes down far enough that dropping a pebble produces no audible landing. Been working this for 6 months. Found just enough gold to keep me hoping and not enough to let me quit. That's the devil's own mathematics. The social structure of the camp defies conventional logic. A man who struck it rich yesterday might be broke today after a bad poker game. The cook, whose barely edible meals are the only thing standing between the camp and starvation, commands more respect than men with proven claims. The assayer, who determines whether your rocks contain fortune or fool's gold, is treated like a combination of priest and judge. You witness your first authentic gold fever when someone shouts the magic words, "Color in the pan." The entire camp mobilizes like ants whose hill has been kicked. Men abandon half-dug latrines, partially eaten meals, and occasionally their pants in the rush to see. The finder, a kid who can't be more than 16, holds up a pan with visible gold flakes like he's displaying the Holy Grail. What follows is a lesson in how quickly civilization evaporates when treasure's involved. Claims are staked, disputed, and restaked. Arguments break out over who owns what based on verbal agreements made while drunk. Someone produces a map that might be authentic or might have been drawn yesterday. The kid wisely stakes his claim with witnesses and armed friends, understanding that legal ownership means nothing if you're too dead to enjoy it. Historians still argue whether the gold rush created wealth or just redistributed it from miners to merchants. Watching Schultz charge a week's wages for a replacement shovel handle, you understand the real money isn't in the ground. It's in the pockets of desperate men willing to pay anything for the chance to dig. The camp store operates like a casino where the house always wins and the players keep doubling down. The darker side of mining life reveals itself after sunset. Men who've spent all day in cramped darkness underground seek oblivion in bottles, fights, or the tents at the camp's edge where entrepreneurial women offer comfort at prices that would make your banker weep. The sounds of the night, drunken singing, arguments over cards, the occasional gunshot blend into a lullaby of poor life choices. You're helping unload the last of the supplies when the ground shudders. For a moment, everyone freezes with the collective thought, earthquake or explosion. The answer comes with a plume of dust from the hillside and men running from a collapsed tunnel. This is the nightmare scenario, where the mountain decides it's tired of being hollowed out and takes its revenge. The rescue effort is heroic and futile in equal measure. Men dig with their bare hands when tools prove too slow. Everyone knows the math. Air runs out fast in a collapsed tunnel, but nobody says it out loud. They pull out 2 survivors and 3 bodies, which by mining camp statistics is a good day. The dead are buried quickly, their claims redistributed before the dirt settles on their graves. As you prepare to leave with the empty wagon and a full appreciation for why you chose telegraph work over mining, Schultz offers parting wisdom. The mountain, she gives and she takes, mostly she takes, but men keep coming because hope is stronger than sense. He gestures at the anthill of activity, already resumed despite the morning's tragedy. Gold fever, it's the only disease where the cure kills you faster than the sickness. The ride back to town feels like ascending from hell to purgatory. Your clothes reek of sulfur and broken dreams. Your ears ring from the constant noise, but your pockets jingle with the gold dust the miners use to pay for supplies, each grain representing someone's hope that tomorrow's dig will be the big one. You've survived Golgotha Springs, which makes you either lucky or smart enough to know when to leave. In the mining business, there's often no difference. The first you hear about the railroad is through the telegraph wire, clicking out a message that makes Theodore drop his coffee cup. Central Pacific Survey Team arriving your vicinity, stop, prepare accommodations, stop, future prosperity, imminent, stop. He stares at the message like it just announced the second coming, which in frontier economic terms, it basically has. Within hours, the town transforms from its usual state of organized chaos into something resembling a beehive that's discovered unlimited honey. The railroad means connection to civilization, markets for cattle and ore, and the kind of growth that turns dirt street towns into actual cities. It also means land speculation, political corruption, and the kind of progress that steamrolls anyone in its way. Progress, your learning, is just another word for creative destruction. The survey team arrives like conquering heroes in dust-covered suits, carrying instruments that look like they're designed to measure the Earth's surrender. The head surveyor, a man named Patterson, whose whiskers could house a family of birds, sets up shop in the hotel and immediately begins transforming the town's future with maps and measurements. Every conversation suddenly includes the phrases, "when the railroad comes," and "property values." You watch from the telegraph office as the social order rearranges itself faster than a deck of cards in a crooked game. The banker extends credit like he's discovered the secret of multiplication. Sven orders inventory like the entire population of Chicago is about to descend on his store. Even the undertaker optimistically expands his coffin selection, understanding that progress always requires casualties. The surveying process is equal parts science and sorcery. Men with chains measure distances with religious devotion, while others peer through instruments that apparently reveal the land's secret desires to host iron rails. They drive stakes into the ground like they're claiming it for an invisible empire, which technically they are. The Central Pacific Railway might as well be Rome for all the power it represents. Railroad's going to change everything, Theodore muses, watching the surveyors argue about grades and curves. Question is whether we'll recognize the place when it's done changing. He's already received 3 offers to buy the telegraph office, each more insistent than the last. The future, apparently, requires aggressive real estate investment. The first conflicts arise within days. The proposed route runs straight through established claims, family graves, and that sacred native burial ground everyone conveniently forgot about until now. The surveyors respond with the patient explanation that progress doesn't detour for sentiment, followed by the less patient explanation that they have government backing and more lawyers than God. You're drafted as translator and mediator when the local native band arrives to discuss the Iron Horse crossing their traditional hunting grounds. The railroad representative, a man whose smile could sell ice to Eskimos, and probably has, offers beads, blankets, and promises worth less than the paper they're not written on. The native leader listens with the expression of someone who's heard this song before and knows how it ends. Your iron horse will bring more white men, he observes with fatalistic accuracy. More white men bring more problems. More problems bring more soldiers. More soldiers bring more graves. The logic is unassailable, but logic has never stopped progress. The meeting ends with an agreement that satisfies no one but looks good in reports to Washington. The human stampede begins before the first rail is laid. Speculators arrive on every stage, men in city suits who look at empty land and see future fortunes. They buy lots that exist only on paper, betting on where the depot will be built. The smart money follows the surveyor's stakes. The really smart money bribes the surveyors to move the stakes. Your telegraph duties now include transmitting buy and sell orders that reshape ownership faster than a tornado reshapes architecture. Claims change hands hourly. Men who owned worthless desert yesterday wake up rich because the railroad needs their worthless desert. Others discover their valuable property is now worthless because the route shifted 3 miles east after a reassessment of geological factors that definitely wasn't influenced by who paid whom. The first construction crews arrive like an army of progress. Irish and Chinese workers who've been building this road across a continent 1 backbreaking mile at a time. They set up camps that make the mining camp look like a temperance meeting. These men work from dawn to exhaustion, laying track with the mechanical precision of humans who've become extensions of the machine they're building. The town's entire economy pivots to serve the railroad. Saloons triple their whiskey orders. New businesses spring up overnight. Laundries run by Chinese workers who followed the railroad. Supply stores, boarding houses, and establishments offering services that aren't discussed in polite company but generate impolite profits. The town's population doubles, then triples, creating a housing shortage that makes tent living fashionable by necessity. Violence escalates proportionally to opportunity. Claim disputes that used to end with harsh words now end with gunfire. The sheriff hires deputies who are really railroad security in disguise. The jail, built for 5, holds 15 on a slow night. You transmit more death notices in a month than the previous year combined, each one a reminder that progress demands blood sacrifice. Historians still argue whether the railroad brought civilization or just a different kind of savagery. Living through it, you see it's both. Civilization's benefits arriving on the same trains as its sins. The iron horse brings mail-order brides and mail-order coffins, school books and whiskey bottles, opportunity and opportunists in equal measure. The Chinese workers face particular challenges, doing the most dangerous jobs for the least pay while enduring casual racism that ranges from economic exploitation to physical violence. They build their own community within the camp, complete with stores, temples, and social structures that baffle and threaten the white population. You learn enough Cantonese to handle their telegraph needs, discovering they're sending money home to families who'll never see the railroad their sacrifice is building. The actual track laying is a symphony of organized chaos. Rails shipped from eastern factories are placed with mathematical precision by men who can't read but understand angles better than engineers. The grading crew moves mountains one shovelful at a time. The bridge builders perform acts of engineering heroism over chassos that would give acrophobes fatal heart attacks. Every mile of track represents dozens of injuries, several deaths, and thousands of dollars that materialize from eastern banks like frontier magic. You're standing on the platform when the first construction train arrives, belching smoke and significance. The engineer waves like a conquering hero, which he is. The train represents the future, arriving at exactly 15 miles per hour, unstoppable as death and considerably noisier. The crowd cheers, even those whose lives are about to be destroyed by what they're celebrating. That night, the saloon conversations all center on the same theme. What happens next? The optimists see prosperity, growth, and connection to the wider world. The pessimists see the end of the frontier, the loss of freedom, and the arrival of Eastern rules in Western spaces. The realists see both and order another whiskey. Theodore, ever the philosopher after his third drink, summarizes it perfectly. The railroad's like getting married, changes everything, some for better, some for worse, and there's no going back once it's done. He raises his glass to the distant whistle of a construction train. Here's to progress. Boys, may we survive it. The cattle drive season starts with the subtlety of a thunderstorm in a library. One day the town's quiet, except for the usual gunshots and arguments. The next it's drowning in cowboys, longhorns, and enough dust to build a small mountain. You're conscripted into helping because every able body is needed when 3,000 head of half-wild cattle funnel through Main Street like a very slow, very angry flood. Your first lesson in cattle economics comes from Rex Matherson, the trail boss who looks like leather, decided to become human, but gave up halfway through. See those longhorns, he says, gesturing at the sea of horns and bad attitudes. Bought 'em in Texas for $4 a head. Sell 'em in Kansas for $40. That's $36 profit per cow, minus whatever tries to kill us between here and there. The Mathematics of Hope, Frontier Edition. You're assigned to help with the supply wagons because actual cattle work requires skills you don't possess, like staying on a horse while it's trying to avoid being gored. The chuck wagon cook, a man everyone calls Biscuit, despite his biscuits being harder than railroad spikes, runs his rolling kitchen like a military operation. Rule 1, he announces, while sharpening a knife that's seen more action than most cavalry sabers. Touch my sourdough starter, and I'll use your guts for sausage casing. The cowboys themselves are a mix of professional drovers, desperate men running from something, and kids who thought cattle driving sounded romantic until they met actual cattle. They speak in a dialect that's part English, part Spanish, and part exhausted profanity. Their ages range from barely shaving to should be dead by now, united by their ability to work 20-hour days while complaining creatively about everything. Your crash course in trail life begins immediately. Wake at 3:30 a.m. to help Biscuit prepare breakfast. Coffee strong enough to float horseshoes, beans that have achieved a state of permanent semi-liquid, and beef so tough it counts as jaw exercise. The cowboys stumble in like zombies who've been taught to swear, grab their food, and head out to begin another day of arguing with cattle about direction. The herd moves like a very inefficient machine powered by bovine stubbornness. The point riders guide from the front, assuming the cattle feel like being guided. The swing and flank riders keep the sides from spreading out like spilled molasses. The drag riders eat dust all day and question their life choices. You're with the supply wagons, which means you eat slightly less dust, but witness more creative blasphemy when wheels break. Cattle are like drunk relatives, explains a cowboy named Tennessee during a rest break. They'll follow you if they think you know where you're going, But the moment they sense weakness, it's every longhorn for himself. He's missing part of an ear, which he claims a steer bit off, but everyone knows was a knife fight in Amarillo. Trail stories improve with distance from truth. The daily routine would be monotonous if it weren't constantly interrupted by attempts on your life. River crossings are especially entertaining, where entertaining means potentially fatal. The Brazos is running high from spring rain, and cattle have strong opinions about swimming. The first few enter reluctantly, followed by a mass of followers who suddenly remember they're not aquatic. Cowboys plunge in on horseback, trying to guide swimming cattle who've decided drowning is preferable to cooperation. You watch from the supply wagon as the organized crossing devolves into chaos. Cattle mill in the water like very large, very stupid fish. Cowboys shout instructions that the cattle ignore with professional indifference. At least 200 head decide the opposite bank looks better and try to turn around mid-river, creating a whirlpool of horns and profanity. Somehow, through what can only be described as miracle or magnificent stubbornness, most make it across. The final count shows only 5 drowned, which Rex considers a victory. Nights on the trail teach you new definitions of exhaustion. After 16 hours of movement, dust, and constant vigilance, cowboys collapse around the campfire like puppets with cut strings. This is when the stories come out, tales of stampedes triggered by lightning, Indians who may or may not have been friendly, and that time in Dodge City that definitely didn't happen the way Jake tells it, but nobody has energy to argue. The night watch rotates through the crew, 2-hour shifts of riding slowly around the herd while singing or humming to keep them calm. Cowboys who can't carry a tune in a bucket suddenly become crooners when 3,000 cattle need lullabies. You take a turn and discover that longhorns have very specific musical tastes. They tolerate your attempt at Sweet Betsy from Pike, but threaten revolution when you try the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Stampedes are the trail's version of natural disasters, except less natural and more disastrous. Your first happens on a clear night when something, maybe a coyote, maybe a cowboy's snore, spooks one steer. That steer spooks 2 more. Those 2 spook 10. And suddenly, 3,000 cattle are running full speed in the dark toward wherever panic takes them. The ground shakes like the earth's having a seizure. Cowboys race alongside, trying to turn the leaders, which is like trying to reason with a tornado. You huddle with the supply wagons, watching distant riders outlined by lightning, actual lightning this time, because nature loves dramatic timing. The stampede runs itself out after 2 miles, leaving cowboys to spend the rest of the night finding scattered cattle and counting casualties. Morning reveals 2 dead steers, 1 injured horse, and a cowboy with a broken arm who insists he's fine until Biscuit sets it with the tenderness of someone tenderizing meat. Historians still argue whether trail drives were romantic adventures or mobile disasters. Living through one, you understand they're both romance for people who find near-death experiences romantic. The beauty of sunset over the plains battles the reality of saddle sores that have developed their own personalities. The freedom of the open range competes with the tyranny of 3,000 cattle who view your schedule as a suggestion. The social dynamics of the drive fascinate and terrify in equal measure. Rex maintains order through competence and the threat of being left on the prairie. Biscuit rules through food, cross him, and enjoy unidentifiable meat for a week. The cowboys form a hierarchy based on skill, experience, and ability to stay conscious after Biscuit's coffee. Arguments are settled quickly because nobody has energy for extended feuds. Indians appear periodically, usually wanting to trade or demanding toll for crossing their land. These negotiations are delicate. Rex offers cattle. They want more cattle. Everyone settles on a number that leaves both sides mildly dissatisfied. One band follows the drive for 3 days, which makes everyone nervous until they reveal they're just enjoying the free entertainment of watching white men argue with cattle. Personal hygiene becomes a distant memory. By week 2, everyone smells like a combination of horse, cattle, sweat, dust, and despair. The occasional stream crossing becomes a chance to rinse off the top layer of trail coating, but actual cleanliness is a fantasy you'll indulge in Kansas. If you make it to Kansas, the odds favor it, but the trail doesn't believe in guarantees. As the drive pushes north, the landscape changes from desert to plains, brown to green, hostile to merely unfriendly. Each mile is bought with exhaustion, paid for in blisters and bug bites. The cattle grow trail-wise, which means they've figured out new ways to be difficult. Your respect for career cowboys grows proportionally to your desire never to see another longhorn after this ends. The showdown happens on a Thursday because even frontier justice needs good timing. You're transcribing a message about grain prices when Sheriff Dawson, and calling him sheriff is like calling a scarecrow security, stumbles into the telegraph office looking like he's seen his own ghost and didn't like the resemblance. "Marshall's coming," he wheezes, clutching a telegram like it's his own death warrant. Federal Marshal says he's here to clean up the territory. This is what passes for law enforcement drama in a town where the sheriff's main qualification was being slightly less corrupt than the other candidates. Dawson won election by promising to only take bribes from respectable criminals, a campaign platform that resonated with voters who appreciated honest dishonesty. Now he faces the prospect of actual law enforcement, and his nervous sweating suggests he's remembering every bribe, every looked-away moment, every creative interpretation of keeping the peace. And the federal marshal arrives on the noon stage like judgment wearing a badge. Thomas Brennan stands 6 foot something of weathered authority, with eyes that have seen enough guilt to fill a cemetery and a mustache that means business. His reputation precedes him, cleaned up Tombstone, survived Dodge City, and once arrested an entire town council for conspiracy. The kind of man who makes career criminals consider farming. You watch from the telegraph office as Brennan surveys Main Street like a general planning battle strategy. His deputy, a younger man who manages to look both eager and terrified, takes notes in a small book. Every suspicious glance, every too quick movement, every guilty conscience trying to look innocent gets cataloged. The town's criminal element suddenly remembers urgent business elsewhere. Interesting town you have here, Brennan observes when he enters the telegraph office. His voice carries the authority of someone who's never had to raise it. Sheriff seems nervous. Any particular reason a lawman should fear a federal marshal? The question hangs in the air like a noose waiting for a neck. Theodore develops sudden intense focus on his telegraph key, tapping out nonsense to avoid the conversation. You, having fewer survival instincts, admit. Sheriff Dawson has a flexible relationship with law enforcement, bends but doesn't break. Usually. Brennan's smile suggests he's heard this description before, usually right before arresting someone. The marshal sets up operations in the hotel, commandeering the largest room and turning it into what he calls the complaint department. Within hours, a line forms of citizens eager to report their neighbors' crimes, real and imagined. Mrs. Henderson accuses the baker of weighing his thumb with the flour. The baker accuses Mrs. Henderson of running an unlicensed brothel, which is technically true, but traditionally ignored. Everyone accuses everyone of something, creating a crime web that would impress a spider with legal training. Brennan's methodology is methodical as a funeral march. He interviews everyone, cross-references stories, and builds a picture of the town's illegal ecosystem. The saloon owner's watered whiskey leads to questions about his supplier. The supplier's creative import taxes lead to the freight company. The freight company leads to Sheriff Dawson's cousin. Everything connects because in a frontier town, crime is a community effort. The first arrest surprises everyone by being Jimmy the horse thief, who hasn't successfully stolen a horse in 3 years, but keeps trying out of principle. Starting small, Brennan explains while Jimmy protests his innocence, despite currently possessing someone else's horse. Petty criminals talk about bigger criminals. Bigger criminals panic and make mistakes. It's like dominoes, except with handcuffs. And Sheriff Dawson attempts damage control by being aggressively helpful. He provides lists of known criminals, mostly people who haven't paid him recently, offers to assist with arrests of his enemies, and swears he's always upheld the law, creatively defined. Brennan accepts this help with the expression of someone handling a snake that insists it's a garden hose. The tension ratchets up when Brennan posts notices offering rewards for information about specific crimes. Suddenly, loyalty becomes expensive. The banker's creative accounting practices surface when his clerk needs drinking money. The illegal faro game in the saloon's back room gets exposed by a sore loser. Even Widow Chen's mysterious packages attract unwanted attention, though she maintains they contain only medicinal herbs with remarkable poker faces. You find yourself in an awkward position when Brennan requests telegraph records. Those messages about gold shipments, cattle rustling operations, and various other activities that seemed like normal frontier business suddenly look different through legal eyes. Theodore claims water damage destroyed older records, which is technically true if you define water damage as Theodore with a bucket. The showdown everyone's been expecting happens when Brennan attempts to arrest Big Tom Hutchinson, who runs the protection racket everyone pretends doesn't exist. Big Tom objects to arrest on the grounds that he's never been arrested before and doesn't intend to start now. The standoff in front of the saloon becomes the day's entertainment, with spectators taking bets on who'll draw first. Federal warrant, Brennan states, not reaching for his gun, but not needing to. His authority radiates like heat from a stove. You can come quietly or loudly. Quietly's easier on everyone. Loudly's easier on the undertaker's business. The logic is unassailable, but Big Tom has built his reputation on assailing the unassailable. What follows is a lesson in professional violence versus amateur enthusiasm. Big Tom goes for his gun with the speed of someone who's practiced in mirrors. Brennan moves like someone who's practiced on people. The fight lasts exactly as long as it takes Big Tom to realize he's already lost. He's disarmed, cuffed, and contemplating life choices before most spectators process what happened. The arrest of Big Tom triggers a cascade of legal consequences. His lieutenants scramble to distance themselves from operations they definitely weren't involved in. Sheriff Dawson discovers urgent county business requiring immediate travel. Several prominent citizens develop sudden illnesses requiring recuperation in other territories. The town's power structure collapses like a house of cards in a windstorm. Historians still argue whether federal intervention helped or hindered frontier development. Watching Brennan work, you understand it's not about help or hindrance. It's about replacing one type of order with another. The old system, corrupt but predictable, gives way to something newer, theoretically cleaner, definitely more complicated. Justice arrives wearing a badge and good intentions, but the price includes everyone's comfortable illegalities. Brennan's final act is appointing a new sheriff, choosing the least corrupt candidate available, which isn't saying much but represents progress. The new man, a former cavalry sergeant named Mitchell, takes the oath with the grim determination of someone who knows he's inheriting a mess but needs the job. His first act is raising the deputy's salary, understanding that honest law enforcement costs more than the dishonest kind. As Brennan prepares to leave for the next town requiring federal attention, he stops by the telegraph office. "Interesting records you have here," he observes, glancing at the suspiciously new-looking logbook. "Shame about that water damage. Terrible how these frontier buildings leak." His tone suggests he knows exactly what happened to those records and has decided not to care. Professional courtesy among survivors. The town adjusts to its new legal reality with the adaptability that defines frontier life. Crime doesn't disappear, it just becomes more circumspect. The new sheriff maintains order through competence rather than corruption, though he's smart enough to know which battles to fight. The saloon still runs card games, but now they're honest games where the house edge is merely outrageous instead of impossible. You return to your telegraph duties with a new appreciation for selective memory and the importance of water damage. The messages continue: cattle prices, mining reports, family news, and definitely no criminal conspiracies. The frontier remains the frontier, just with better paperwork and more official oversight. Whether that's progress depends on which side of the badge you're standing on. The Tuesday night poker game above Madame Lucille's establishment was supposedly men only until Charlotte, Charlie McKenna, sat down with a carpetbag full of cash and a smile that suggested arguing would be medically inadvisable. She wore men's clothes like she was doing them a favor, handled cards like they owed her money, and introduced herself with, "I'm here to play poker. Anyone object to losing money to a woman?" The objections were numerous but brief, especially after she demonstrated her disagreement resolution technique on Bart Stevens, who made the mistake of suggesting she'd be more comfortable downstairs with the working girls. One broken nose later, Bart was reconsidering his stance on women's activities while Charlotte was dealing herself into the game. This was your introduction to frontier feminism. Practical, armed, and unconcerned with your comfort level, women in the West occupied every imaginable niche, from respectable to notorious, often simultaneously. You'd already met Widow Chen, whose laundry service concealed an intelligence network that would impress government agencies. Madame Lucille ran her establishment like a Fortune 500 company. If Fortune 500 companies kept shotguns under the cash register and had bouncers who could bench press a horse. Men think women come west following them, Charlotte explained, while taking everyone's money with embarrassing efficiency. Truth is, we come for the same reason, opportunity. Difference is, we're better at finding it. She laid down a full house, queens over jacks, naturally. Plus, social rules are more like suggestions out here. Back east, I'd be a spinster. Here, I'm an entrepreneur. The economics of frontier womanhood fascinated in their brutal mathematics. A seamstress could make decent money, but a laundress made better, and a saloon girl made more in a month than either made in a year. The respectable women pretended not to know the soiled doves, while secretly envying their financial independence. The working girls pretended not to notice the respectable women's husbands sneaking in the back door. Your education expanded when the new schoolmarm arrived, bringing civilization in the form of McGuffey readers and a determination that would have impressed Sherman's march. Miss Adelaide Brennan, no relation to the marshal, she insisted with suspicious frequency, took one look at the town's children running wild and declared educational war. Within a week, she had them conjugating verbs like their lives depended on it, which, given her expression when they got it wrong, they might. "Education is the great equalizer," she announced at the town meeting, staring down the committee of men who thought the school budget would be better spent on a new jail. "These children deserve better than ignorance, and by God, they'll get it if I have to beat knowledge into them with their own slates." The committee, faced with her determination and possibly afraid of those slates, approved the budget. The Female Information Network operated with efficiency that would make modern social media jealous. News traveled from the laundry to the general store to the boarding house kitchen faster than telegraph wires. When Jake Morrison started stepping out on his wife, she knew before he'd finished fastening his pants. When the banker was planning to foreclose on the widow Patterson's ranch, she had a lawyer from the county seat before he'd finished filing the paperwork. Charlotte's backstory emerged over subsequent poker games. Daughter of a Confederate colonel who lost everything except his pride and terrible financial sense. Learned cards from Union soldiers during Reconstruction. Came west after shooting her fiancé for irreconcilable differences, which apparently meant he was sleeping with her sister. I could have been a proper Southern lady, she mused while dealing, but proper Southern ladies don't get to shoot people who deserve it. The respectable women had their own survival strategies. Mrs. Morrison, the judge's wife, ruled the town's social scene with an iron fist in a lace glove. Her tea parties were intelligence gathering operations disguised as doily exhibitions. She knew everyone's business, everyone's secrets, and everyone's weak points. Cross her, and suddenly you couldn't buy thread at the general store or get your laundry done anywhere in town. The working girls at Madame Lucille's operated as independent contractors in the gig economy before anyone coined the term. They set their own rates, chose their own clients, and pooled resources for protection and medical care. Dr. Holiday treated them with the same professionalism he showed the mayor's wife, possibly more, since they paid in cash and didn't complain about his drinking. You witnessed the formation of the Ladies' Temperance Society, which everyone understood was about as much about temperance as the sheriff was about law enforcement. They met weekly to discuss the evils of alcohol while planning political maneuvers that would have impressed Machiavelli. Their first victory was getting voting rights for school board elections. Their second was electing themselves to the school board. The men realized too late they'd been outmaneuvered by opponents who fought with weapons they didn't understand: organization and patience. The most successful women combined traditional feminine skills with frontier pragmatism. Sarah Chen, Widow Chen's daughter, ran a dress shop that also sold ammunition, because a lady needs both fashion and firepower. The boarding house kitchen served as an informal employment agency, matchmaking service, and revolutionary planning committee, depending on the day. Even the church ladies packed pistols in their prayer books, understanding that turning the other cheek worked better when backed by Smith & Wesson. Secret to surviving as a woman out here, Madame Lucille explained during one of her rare philosophical moments, is understanding that respectability is currency. You can spend it or save it, but either way, make sure you get good value. She'd spent hers building a business empire that included the saloon, several rental properties, and a silent partnership in the bank. The same men who publicly shunned her privately borrowed money from her at rates that would make loan sharks blush. Charlotte's influence grew as her poker winnings accumulated. She invested in mining claims, cattle futures, and that new hotel being built near the railroad depot. When questioned about a woman involving herself in business, she responded, "Money doesn't care about gender, neither do I." Her philosophy spread to other women who realized that frontier chaos created opportunities civilization would never allow. The transformation was subtle but steady. Women appeared in previously male-only spaces. The telegraph office hired a female operator for the night shift. The bank teller position went to a widow who could calculate interest in her head faster than the adding machine. Each small victory opened doors for the next, creating momentum that horrified traditionalists and delighted progressives, both of whom were usually the same people, depending on whether it benefited them. Historians still argue whether the frontier liberated women or just relocated their oppression, living through it. You see, it did both. Liberation for those strong enough to seize it, oppression for those who couldn't. But the mere possibility of choice, the chance to reinvent yourself beyond society's expectations, drew women like Charlotte, who preferred dangerous freedom to safe subjugation. The Tuesday poker game became co-ed permanently after Charlotte's third week of taking everyone's money. Other women joined. The schoolmarm had a surprising talent for bluffing, and one of Lucille's girls could calculate odds like a mathematics professor. The men grumbled but adapted, possibly realizing that losing money to women was no worse than losing it to each other, and the conversation was generally more interesting. Your last glimpse of this lesson comes when Charlotte faces down a traveling gambler who objects to her presence at his table. She listens to his tirade about proper places for proper ladies with the patience of someone deciding where to shoot someone for maximum effect. When he finishes, she responds simply, "This is the frontier, sir. Nothing's proper, nobody's a lady, and your deal is showing. Now, are we playing cards or are you leaving under your own power?" He plays. She wins. The frontier adapts, one hand at a time. The news arrives the way all important news does on the frontier, through three different sources, each contradicting the others, all claiming absolute truth. The Telegraph chatters with reports of Lincoln's assassination, then denies it, then confirms it again with details that change with each transmission. You're transcribing these conflicting messages while Theodore mutters about the reliability of Eastern operators who can't agree whether the president was shot at a theater or a salon. This is frontier communication, a game of whispers played across thousands of miles of wire through operators of varying sobriety and literacy. By the time news reaches you, it's been filtered through dozens of interpretations, each adding their own editorial flourishes. The president is dead, wounded, recovering, dying again, and possibly ascending to heaven, depending on which message you believe. The Pony Express rider, who thunders into town 3 days later, carries newspapers that are only 2 weeks old, practically breaking news by frontier standards. The crowd that gathers to hear him read can't actually read themselves, creating a peculiar democracy where literacy becomes a public service. He stands on a crate outside the saloon, reading about national tragedy to an audience more familiar with personal ones. "Says here, the war's definitely over," he announces, struggling with the bigger words. Union preserved, slavery abolished, and everyone's supposed to be friends now. The Confederate veterans in the crowd exchange glances that suggest a friendship might take more than newspaper declarations. The Union veterans look equally skeptical. The people who avoided the war altogether by heading west wonder if this means relatives they haven't heard from in years are alive, dead, or still angry about that borrowed money. The telegraph becomes the frontier's nervous system, carrying messages that reshape lives with electric indifference. Father died. Stop farm foreclosed. Stop. Don't come home. Stop. Arrives for the baker boy, who stares at the paper like it might change its mind. Married Elizabeth. Stop very happy. Stop forgot you existed. Stop. Comes for Miss Sarah. though the sender probably didn't include that last part. You learn to read between the lines of these condensed tragedies and triumphs. Uncle Sick. Stop come if convenient stop means he's dying and they need you there yesterday. Business opportunities stop, send money stop means someone's desperate enough to telegraph for help. All well, stop letter follows stop means something's terribly wrong, but they can't afford the word count to explain. The most interesting messages are the coded ones. Cattle buyers use elaborate systems to disguise their offers, turning grandmother enjoys Thursday picnics into offering $30 per head, Thursday delivery. The Chinese merchants have their own code that you pretend not to understand while absolutely understanding that Jade Mountain brings spring rain means a shipment is arriving that customs shouldn't know about. Charlotte McKenna starts a correspondence chess game with someone in San Francisco, telegraphing moves that cost more than most people's monthly wages. Chess teaches patience and planning, she explains while dictating her next move. Plus, I'm winning $50, which teaches that smart women can extract money from stupid men even at distance. Her opponent, who turns out to be a judge, eventually stops responding after she puts him in checkmate and requests payment. The newspaper, when it actually arrives, is treated like Holy Scripture if Holy Scripture were printed on paper that tears if you look at it wrong. The single copy passes from hand to hand until the ink's worn off and the paper's more whole than news. People memorize articles to recite later, adding their own interpretations until the original story becomes frontier mythology. You start a side business reading and writing letters for the illiterate, which is most everyone. The stories pour out, sons writing to mothers they'll never see again, husbands promising wives they'll send for them soon when everyone knows soon means never, daughters explaining why they can't come home anymore without explaining the real reason. You become confessor, translator, and creative editor, turning I done messed up real bad into circumstances have required adaptation. The most heartbreaking are the letters that can't be delivered. Dead addresses, dead recipients, dead hopes piling up in the back of the post office like paper tombstones. The postmaster, a philosophical drunk named Clemens, occasionally burns them in a ceremony he calls releasing the words to heaven, though it's really just preventing fire hazards. Communication technology advances in fits and starts. The new telegraph key arrives with promises of faster transmission, but it's so sensitive that a fly landing on it sends gibberish to Denver. The improved mail service means letters arrive merely weeks old instead of months, though they still occasionally arrive pre-opened by helpful postal employees checking for, supposedly, contraband. The town crier position, held by Stumpy Pete, who lost his legs to frostbite and his inhibitions to whiskey, represents the oldest form of news distribution. He rolls through town on a wheeled platform, shouting headlines with creative interpretations. Government passes new law about something, he announces. Probably affects everyone, details unclear, whiskey tax definitely involved. The formation of the town's first newspaper is less about journalism and more about one man's desire to complain publicly about everyone. Editor Josiah Pritchard, failed poet and successful drunk, publishes The Perdition Weekly Truth with a printing press that's missing crucial letters. His editorials are place all E's with threes, giving them an apocalyptic quality that matches his worldview. TH3 Mayor is a crook, screams one headline, followed by an article detailing grievances going back to 1862. Dr. Holliday drunk again, announces another, which is less news than weather report. The advertisements are creative fiction, promising Miracle 3 Cure 3S and Land D3Ls that exist primarily in Pritchard's imagination. The social dynamics of information flow fascinate. Bad news travels at the speed of schadenfreude, while good news limps along like it's embarrassed to exist. When Jake strikes gold, everyone knows within hours. When he loses it all at poker the same night, everyone knows within minutes. The town's emotional ecosystem feeds on drama like a plant feeds on sun. Historians still argue whether improved communication helped or hindered frontier development. Living through it, you see it does both, connecting isolated communities while importing Eastern problems, spreading vital information alongside destructive rumors, creating bonds while revealing divisions. Every message is a double-edged sword, cutting through isolation while sometimes cutting the recipient. Your role as information broker gives you unexpected power. You know who's rich, who's pretending, who's planning to leave, who's already gone. You know which businesses are failing before their owners do, which relationships are ending before the participants realize. This knowledge is currency, but spending it requires wisdom about when silence is golden and when it's just yellow. The evening ritual of news sharing at the saloon becomes the town's real newspaper. Men who can't read discuss articles they've had explained to them, adding interpretations that would horrify the original authors. National politics filter through local prejudices until Abraham Lincoln becomes either saint or sinner, depending on who's buying drinks. International news might as well be fiction for all the accuracy that survives the journey. As another day of messages ends, births, deaths, fortune, ruin, all reduced to 10-cent per word telegrams. You reflect on the strange intimacy of frontier communication. You know these people's secrets without knowing their faces, their hopes without sharing their lives. The telegraph key falls silent, but the stories continue, waiting for tomorrow's technology to carry them across the growing nation, connecting hearts across distances that horses can't cross, but electricity can. The morning you decide to stop running and start building arrives with no fanfare, just a realization while shaving that you've stopped thinking about back east as home. Your face in the cracked mirror has acquired that leather and determination look that marks frontier survivors. 6 months of dodging bullets, drinking questionable water, and pretending Theodore's coffee is consumable have transformed you from greenhorn to something approaching competent. Time to think beyond survival toward that dangerous frontier concept. The future, the land office, a glorified shack with delusions of governmental authority, opens at what they call 8 a.m., but is really whenever Jenkins finishes his morning whiskey. The Homestead Act promises 160 acres to anyone willing to prove up live on it, improve it, and survive it for 5 years. The clerk, whose passion for paperwork borders on the romantic, explains the requirements with evangelical fervor, while flies circle his head like a particularly lazy halo. First, you need to file your claim, he intones, producing forms that look like they've been used as napkins. Then you build a dwelling, and yes, it needs walls and a roof. Johnson tried to claim a tent counts, and we're still laughing. You must cultivate at least 20 acres, dig a well, and not die. That last part's important, but not technically required. You study the available plots on a map, so optimistic it shows rivers where there's only dust, and towns where there's only hope. The good land near water was claimed before the ink dried on the act. The decent land went to those with connections, cash, or creative claim jumping skills. What's left resembles what God was practicing on before making actual farmland, rocky, dry, and ornery as a hungover mule. But there's a plot 10 miles north, tucked against a small rise that might provide wind protection and possibly conceals a spring. The previous claimant gave up after what the records diplomatically call Indian troubles, but was probably just loneliness that drove him back east. For 18 in filing fees that represent a week's wages, you become a theoretical landowner, pending 5 years of agricultural combat. The first step is shelter, which in frontier architecture means anything that keeps most of the rain out and some of the heat in. You hire 2 discharged soldiers who've turned their destruction skills toward construction. They examine your land with the expression of doctors diagnosing something terminal but treatable. Could be worse, one observes. Could be on fire, his partner adds. Give it time. Frontier construction is equal parts engineering and optimism. You start with a dugout, basically a glorified hole in the hillside, because lumber costs more than your entire stake, and adobe requires water you don't have. Digging into the earth like a very ambitious gopher, you discover why the previous owner left. The ground has more rocks than soil, each one placed by nature specifically to break your shovel. The walls go up slowly, stones chinked with mud that's mostly hope and spit. The roof is logs covered with whatever will shed water, tar paper if you're rich, sod if you're everyone else. You go with sod, creating a ceiling that occasionally drops dirt in your coffee, but provides excellent insulation and homes for various creatures you'll meet later at inconvenient times. Your neighbors, spread across the landscape like scattered punctuation, arrive to help with the traditional frontier housewarming. They criticize your construction while drinking your whiskey. Old Patterson, whose definition of neighbor stretches to include anyone within a day's ride, examines your walls like they've personally offended him. Seen worse, he admits grudgingly. Course, those folks died in the winter of '72. The well digging nearly kills you, and that's not frontier hyperbole. 20 feet down, hitting nothing but dry dirt and disappointment. You're ready to give up when the ground suddenly turns damp. 30 feet down, water seeps in like liquid miracle. It tastes like it's been filtered through centuries of mineral deposits and possibly some fossils, but it's wet and won't kill you immediately, which makes it premium frontier water. Proving up requires cultivation. turning land that's never seen a plow into something resembling productivity. Your first attempt at plowing involves a borrowed mule with strong opinions about work, a plow that predates the Revolutionary War, and language that would make Theodore blush. The mule wins most arguments, but gradually, furrows appear like scars on the landscape's face. You plant corn because it's forgiving, wheat because you're optimistic, and vegetables because scurvy is an undignified way to die. The seeds go into ground that accepts them with the enthusiasm of a grave accepting a coffin. You water them with buckets hauled from your well until your back develops its own zip code. Some grow from spite, others from miracle, most not at all. The isolation hits harder than expected. Your nearest neighbor is 3 miles of bad road away. Town is a half-day journey that requires planning like a military campaign. Evenings stretch long as winter shadows, filled with sounds that might be wind, might be wildlife, might be your sanity gently departing. You talk to the mule because it's marginally better conversation than yourself, but slowly, impossibly, things improve. The first corn stalks push through soil that seemed sterile as salted earth. Your dugout develops personality. A shelf here, a proper door there, glass windows that cost more than ammunition but let in light that doesn't require kerosene. You learn the satisfaction of eating food you grew, even if it tastes like struggle seasoned with determination. Other homesteaders arrive, drawn by the same combination of desperation and dreams. The Swenson family claims the plot east of yours, bringing chaos in the form of 5 children who treat the frontier like a personal playground. Maria Gonzalez, whose husband died on the trail, takes the southern claim with a determination that makes granite look indecisive. Community forms through shared hardship and borrowed tools. The railroad's arrival changes everything. Suddenly, your middle of nowhere becomes somewhere adjacent to transportation. Land values rise like bread with too much yeast. The general store opens a branch nearby, though store generously describes a tent with pretensions. Markets for your crops exist beyond hoping someone needs corn and has money simultaneously. You learn frontier economics through painful experience. Crop prices fluctuate based on eastern whims and weather you can't control. The bank offers loans at rates that would embarrass pirates. Everyone owes everyone else in a complex web of credit, barter, and optimistic IOUs. Success means breaking even. Profit is for people who started with money. But there's something deeply satisfying about building from nothing. Your hands develop calluses with their own topography. Your dugout becomes a proper house through additions that would horrify architects but keep weather out. The corn grows tall enough to whisper secrets in the wind. You're creating something permanent in a landscape that spent eternity being temporary. Historians still argue whether homesteading was democratic opportunity or government-sponsored suffering. Living it, you understand it's both. Democracy with dirt under its fingernails. Opportunity that demands everything and delivers sometimes. You've traded the telegraph office's steady wages for the uncertainty of weather, pests, and markets that treat small farmers like dice in a cosmic craps game. But standing in your doorway, watching sunset paint your fields gold, You feel something that might be pride or might be exhaustion masquerading as accomplishment. You've claimed your piece of the frontier, carved civilization from reluctant wilderness. Whether you'll last the full 5 years remains uncertain. The frontier offers no guarantees, only chances. The evening ritual now includes planning beyond tomorrow, where to build the barn you can't afford yet, which crops might survive both drought and deluge, whether to invest in cattle or maintain your sanity. The future stretches ahead like your fields, full of potential and pitfalls in equal measure. You're no longer just surviving the frontier, you're trying to shape it, one furrow at a time. The stars emerge in the vast western sky, unmarred by civilization's glow. Coyotes sing their ancient songs while you plan tomorrow's battle with nature. Your land sits silent, except for wind through corn that shouldn't exist, but does. You've come full circle from that first day stepping off the stagecoach, no longer a stranger to the frontier, but part of it, for better or worse, until drought, locusts, or mortgage payments do you part.